Hey, welcome to week 9 of the Language and Literacy course. This week's topic is all about assessment. And I'm sure you have all experienced being assessed. There are two main types of assessment. There's the informal assessment and formal assessment, otherwise known as formative and summative. So informal links with formative. So formative assessment means that we are using this to fuel our future teaching. It tells us what the child does not know or what they do know. And that is what then guides us in how to approach the next step. And I'm a fan of formative, aka informal assessment, because I believe that the summative or formal assessment is just a moment in time, and it could be different tomorrow. And so, what are we really measuring? I do believe that it is important in some high stakes testing. However, when you're a teacher and you are using your assessment to inform your teaching, you need to be relying upon formative assessment every day. That doesn't mean giving tests every day. That means assessment every day. And I know you are already doing that as teachers. That's what we do as teachers all the time, right? So, let's talk about this. Are you a good reader? Are you a poor reader? How do you know? Did your teachers know? How did they know? The problem with assessing readers is that you can't open up their brain and look inside and say, oh, yes, you were able to read that word correctly, and your comprehension skills were great. It's much harder than assessing math or science or a lot of other things, because with math, did you get the problem correct or not? It's different with reading, because typically reading happens internally. It happens silently. Children are reading and you don't know if they understood what that word meant. You just don't know. And so that's where the informal assessment comes in. Think about the various ways your teachers assessed your reading skills when you were in grade school. And more importantly, did those tests affect you positively or negatively? Think about how you experienced standardized testing. Standardized testing is the absolute formal assessment, summative assessment. This is what it is. That's what it's all about. So those standardized tests, such as in the 90s, it was the WASL, the Washington Assessment of Student Learning. Now it's the SBAC, I believe, the standardized. I'm sorry, I can't remember the names for the acronym. The SBAC is an assessment, though, that is a summative assessment for children in various grades. Did those assessments that you experienced growing up, did they have an adverse effect on your view of yourself as a reader? And then how did that affect your desire to read? How will your own experiences influence the assessment process that you plan to implement in your classroom? Now, I'm going to read a passage out of one of my many books about reading, and it spoke to me, and I thought I would share it with you. It was springtime, and Sue Latham smiled as she looked through a folder with assessment information on John, a low reader in her third grade classroom. How her assessment of him had changed from early fall to now. She noted that on a formal, standardized reading test given in October, John had scored in the 32nd percentile, which meant that he was below average in comparison to other third graders. Although she did not think the score was particularly useful to her in deciding how to work with John, Mrs. Latham knew that her principal examined these scores. She also noted that on a more informal assessment related to his attitude toward reading, John viewed himself positively. Thank goodness. He also did well on a section from another informal reading assessment in which he picked questions from a list that he thought would help a person understand the important ideas about a selection. This reminded her of yesterday's social studies lesson on explorers. John and other students had raised some insightful questions as the class previewed the chapter and created a class list of questions that might be answered as they worked on the chapter. At the start of the school year, Mrs. Latham had decided to work with John in a second grade basal reader along with 4 other students. Basal readers are like primer readers. So they're pretty basic, but they have like read a tiny little blurb and then or a tiny story and then answer a bunch of questions. That's what a basal is. Initially, her decision was based on a conversation with John's second grade teacher and her review of the skill mastery tests administered as part of the basal reader program. One of these tests assessed students' ability to associate the hard and soft sounds of the letter G. John didn't reach mastery of this particular skill. In other words, he didn't score correctly on 80% of the items related to the skill objective. In fact, he answered only 6 out of 10 items correctly. This puzzled Mrs. Latham because just the day before, John had shared a part of a book he was reading about a visit to the zoo, which included seeing giraffes and petting goats. So on the skill portion of the test, he couldn't differentiate between the hard G or the soft J of the letter G. Yet, he was able to read a passage about going to the zoo and seeing giraffes and petting goats. Well, giraffes and goats, soft G, hard G, right? So John didn't experience difficulty reading passages containing words with soft and hard G sounds. Later in October, she had a miscue analysis compiled from a running record of John's oral reading during small group instruction. So I have created videos for you to watch about running records. Running records are very wonderful ways to assess children quickly and easily on the words they know and the words they don't know. They cue or miscue, okay? She had noted no difficulties in his reading of either soft or hard sounds. Mrs. Latham decided back then to capitalize on John's strength of raising questions about material read both in his reading group and in social studies and science units. She decided not to use additional instructional time to work on the soft and hard sounds of G, even though he had not achieved mastery for this objective based on the basal reader test. In fact, in November, she thought that John was functioning well enough in the second grade basal reader to reassign him to the third grade reader. The bottom line is that Mrs. Latham considered information from informal and formal tests and her observations of John in actual reading situations. She then made decisions based on multiple data sources. Corroborating her instructional decisions was John's portfolio of work in progress, some stories and poems he was working on in response to their literature theme unit on Tall Tales, and his personal reading list for sustained silent reading. By using examples of John's actual reading and actual writing, Sue Latham had made an authentic assessment of John's performance in literacy. A reason to smile. So an authentic assessment of John's performance in literacy. I like the words authentic because what they're saying is that one test is not authentic. You need multiple sources of data in order to create an authentic view of the child and their reading. Good teachers use multiple ways to assess their students. Teachers who want to gain a holistic view of their students will be informally assessing them constantly. And there are so many ways to do this. Using literacy games to transition students from circle time to work time, or from circle time to outside time, are fantastic ways to find out where students are in their literacy acquisition. Listening to students read, playing sight word games, playing phonics games, Having students create words using the movable alphabet. Playing knock-knock games with sandpaper letters. And you can buy these at mainstream education stores. They're not just Montessori anymore. In fact, movable alphabet you can also get for your classroom. They're just not that expensive. They're like, I don't know, $30. Just get a movable alphabet. You will be able to do so much with it. Authentic assessment involves the child in the process. It's no longer something we do to children, but something that the child does for themselves. If they're working with self-correcting materials, who is actually doing the assessment? The child is. And it's far more powerful than when an outsider does it, namely the teacher. So if a child is working with their work and they have a self-correcting material that helps them, they don't need the teacher to say, oh, you spelled that wrong, or you spelled that wrong, or you spelled that wrong. They just use the material and they notice their own mistakes and fix them accordingly. In order to create more authenticity in our assessments, we need to make them more meaningful and less based on a teacher telling students what they did wrong. And also by having the child more involved in the process. Okay, so this week, you're going to be learning about, ways to assess your students. You'll be watching some videos. You'll be watching a public school teacher, working with their cohorts in a way that is helping the teachers. I'm sorry, I'm tongue-tied right now. However, the video that we'll be watching has professional development, so the teachers are learning from Miss Peditori, and you'll be watching that and learning from that. But you'll also be seeing some videos about easy ways to assess your students in the classroom in the here and now. So I hope you enjoy it, and I look forward to talking with you and reading your reflections about learning about this week. Have a great week and see you later. Bye.